Like we discussed last time about conflict,
Mm-hmm.
and I told you that for me, whenever I read about conflict, for me I thought it was argument, it was anger.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, there is a word that I keep reading uh, is about exposition.
Okay.
Now, what is an exposition?
Okay. I'll take that topic together with metaphor because even during my classes, I realized that many students were getting confused with exposition and metaphor. Let's say there is this character called Johnny, who is a very egoistical maniac and narcissist of the worst kind. And one of his employee has created a big blunder which has cost him millions. Now Johnny is sitting in his office behind his desk, and the employee comes, and Johnny is probably having an orange juice, and you show that Johnny crushes the glass. Now that is kind of a way to communicate to the audience without dialogues or strong reactions from the characters, that what is going on in the head of Johnny. And now behind Johnny, if there is a poster of Hitler, that coupled with this confirms to the audience what kind of person this is. Now that is exposition. Any background information that becomes part of your scene, which the audience is witnessing, uh, and they come to know something about the characters, that is exposition. Now Johnny is crushing the glass, the Hitler poster, these are a way to convey to the audience what kind of person he is and what he is feeling. But imagine that you cut from that scene. The employee has come, Johnny glances at him, and you cut from there, and somewhere far away in some island, there's a volcano, a lava bursting out. Now that is a metaphor, because you have drawn a parallel to what Johnny is going through. Not necessarily every time to draw a parallel you have to go into a disconnected scene, but if it serves the purpose, fair enough. But in especially in comedy, this kind of things have been shown a lot, but people often misunderstand exposition, and they mix it up, exposition and metaphor. Metaphor is more of a poetic touch towards telling the audience what is going on in the scene in a very aesthetic, poetic way. Exposition is revelation of who the character is, what he's thinking, without the help of dialogues and all that. Of course, the character has an action. Johnny can get up and say, "You're fired." That is an action of the character. Johnny says it, that is a dialogue. Beyond all that, when you have shown these subtle things which gives the audience an idea of what is going on directly, then it is an exposition. With in a poetic, aesthetic way, drawing a parallel to the situation, it's a metaphor.
That comes in a film, like what you just explained to me.
No, I think it started in literature. Any poetry is incomplete with a metaphor, and any novel would have an abundance of metaphor. You read a novel where the author says her skin is peach.
Peaches and cream.
So then
That's a metaphor.
the author is drawing a parallel and telling you. And I think novel writing cannot possibly happen, or poetry for that matter, without metaphor. Films, very few people use it, and these days it is called visual metaphor and all that, but metaphor is metaphor anyways. So
How to use metaphors to enhance a narrative? Like, I think when you said author writes that her skin is like peaches and cream, I am confusing it again with describing her skin.
but it was by drawing a parallel to something that the audience already knows. Explosion of a lava, audience understands what it is. You're drawing a parallel with that by telling what this person is going through.
So when we talk about the skin, that's probably coming. I'm only asking this pertaining to writing, not writing a screenplay for a film or something. But when you're explaining how the girl is, that's like drawing a picture in front of them by saying peaches and cream that she is a fair-skinned girl.
Okay.
But in a narrative, so that became her introduction of her looks. Okay. Now when we actually come into the story, then how do I use a metaphor to enhance my narrative?
Depends upon story to story, but let me attempt it. I think there is this film called Piazza. If I recall right, I know that scene is there. I think it is in Piazza by Gurudutt. Okay. He's troubled by, as a hero, he goes through a lot of trials and tribulations, and he comes to a point where he's a filmmaker. He comes back to the studio, and he's standing with his arms touching the edges of the door and looking into the dark studio with light behind him. Now you can't see the hero because he's not facing the light. You just see a silhouette of a man. If you have seen that film and the story, you know that it depicts the darkness that he's looking into, because he has gone into such a level of depression he cannot come out of it. He's facing away from the light. He's turned his face around, is turned away from the light and looking into the darkness, because after that character is never going to emerge out of his darkness. So now that is a visual metaphor. That scene could have happened in a very simple way. As a storyteller, your job was to say what this character was depressed. You can have shown him as drinking alcohol and perhaps getting frustrated, hitting something. There were many ways to say that, show that. But the director chose that particular way of presenting it. Now, not necessarily the audience will get it every time, but when they get it, it creates a big impact.
It's a very beautiful example, and I have seen that scene, and I think after that starts a song also. But again, film is a very visual medium. I want to know now the same scene, because it's a visual medium and I am writing. How would I bring in the same visual metaphor in my writing? I mean, if you had to write a paragraph about the same situation, and it should be the same scene, but it should come in a book, in a written format, then how would I write it? Or how can I write it?
So you don't want the description which you are aware that happens in the novel writing. Okay? You don't want the visual filmmaking approach. You want a particular scene to be converted into a metaphorical.
Yes, a particular scene. Let's take this scene only, because I absolutely love this scene. So if I had to write it.
Which one?
The same scene that he comes and he stands with his hands near the door. And
I think that even in books and words will come the same way. Let's go into your story. Okay, now there is a reason. Okay. For me, your whole story is a metaphor. That's why I got interested in it. Okay. The very journey of the hero and everything that happens to him is a metaphorical way to tell him that he's wrong. So that was the beauty of that story. I think you shouldn't bother about the scene. Your story is a metaphor. But let's just take another random story where.
But before you go into the random story, can I just tell you that I did not know that my whole story is like a metaphor. I never looked.
But when you narrated it the first time, you shared it the first time, that was what I could see in it. Okay, and that is how I think it has been developing lately also, with all the elements and things that you're talking about. It's coming there. I think let's take this story called Shack. I think you only had shared it with me. If you can just rush through the story.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful book that I read. And it's a story about a father who loses his daughter, as in the daughter is kidnapped right in front of his eyes. And they try to find her, search for her, and they don't actually know what happened. And then they come to know that there is a serial killer, but they don't find the girl's body. So he is not sure whether the kid is dead or not. And then he goes into this whole trauma, which the family is into a trauma. The whole family is in trauma. But he is more into it. And one day he gets a letter. And the letter is signed by God. And he thinks he is going crazy. So without telling his family, he just confides in one friend. And he decides to go on this trip. And on this trip, when he is actually going to the place, he sent his wife and the kids away. And he's gone to this trip. He meets with an accident on the road. His truck swivels and, he comes to a halt, but he still drives on. And he reaches this place, and then he actually meets the Holy Trinity. So, through this Holy Trinity, which is God and the Spirit and our Father, and it's very nice because God, usually people think it's a male figure, but in this is a woman. So this entire journey of
who are these three people? One is God.
One is God. One is Jesus Christ, and one is the Spirit. So basically, our Father. So the Father is being played. Our Father, people generally think, is the God. So our Father is being played by a woman, and Jesus Christ, and the Holy Trinity, the Spirit. So these are the three people whom he meets and spends a week and learns many things in life, happens to meet his daughter, comes to know, that the daughter is dead, sees her, and in the end the book reveals that, the accident that he had was actually an accident, and he was in the hospital. And then the book is in a question mark. So we don't know if it happened for real or what, or was it his imagination but it was revealed very late and towards the end of the book. So the whole journey, we think it's real. And I started to believe that, it is real.
Okay. So, let's look at that idea of Trinity as God. If the storytellers of the world wanted to give the humans a concept of God, it could have been easily achieved by having the Father God, right? Why create the Son God? Even if they created the Son God, it could have still been achieved by Father and Son God. why create the Holy Spirit as the third angle?
I never dwelled so deeply into.
Okay, so the way I see it is that universe is governed by polarities, duality. But I feel that that is not the case. Based on whatever I've read, of course, and what I've understood and all that, we see things in pair, day, night, light, darkness, and everything else that we could see, addition, subtraction, joy, sorrow, pain, pleasure. Everything is in a combination with the opposite. A lot of these things we see as black and white. Either it is pain or a pleasure. But the only message that I get from these stories and scriptures and all that is that the idea of Trinity is not just in Christianity or Islam or Hinduism. It is everywhere, irrespective of any religion or any holy scripture. The idea of Trinity was a clear message that beyond the darkness and light, there is a place called cusp, where the darkness and the light meets. Beyond black and white, there is a place called gray. And world is a combination of all three. You can't divide yourself on either side of it, which Gautam Buddha had rightly put. There is no, any extreme is wrong. The middle way is the right way. So for us to delve into our lives, to understand the meaning of life and to take on any journey that we pursue, we need to go with that understanding that there will be black, white and gray. Things cannot always be black and white. Now that has been tried, the storytellers have tried to instill in us that understanding. That we don't grasp it is a different story by itself. But the idea of Trinity, even in Hindu, Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, one is a creator, one is a destroyer, and there is a middle one. The idea of Trinity is that you can't be on extremes. The middle is equally important. There will be situations in life where you'll have to take a stand to the extreme, but you'll have to always center back to the middle path. And that is the only way to pursue your life. That is how I see it. So, that for me is a metaphor. Now, there is another story called Life of Pi, where the whole story is about a young boy being stranded with a tiger in a boat in a vast ocean. Now, it was beautifully depicted in a movie and as good as the book itself. But that is also a metaphor. The tiger was a metaphor. The tiger was the culmination and the sum of all his fears. And he was fighting his fear. That entire story is a metaphor.
Beautiful.
If you're lost in a sea, you have left your home, you're going to an unknown place, and in between you're stranded, what would you go through? And you're young, not in a position to fight your battles yet. You would be afraid. Why else would every other passenger is killed, only the tiger and the boy survives? It could have been very easily a castaway situation with only the boy surviving. Why the tiger being there? The tiger was the storyteller's way of saying how the boy copes with his fears. At first he's scared, then he befriends, he accepts it, and that's how the story develops. So metaphor is it doesn't have to be a disconnected scene. It could be well woven within the scene itself.
See, for me, when I started to write, I did not know anything about the craft of storytelling.
Which is a good thing.
And that is how I started flowing. How we would write a composition in school. That is how I started. But of course, discussing it with you for the past couple of years, my story has enhanced a lot.
Okay, I would like to add here. We both are fans of Godfather. Now, Godfather, Mario Puzo wrote the, I think, classic crime novel at the time. And then he was approached for movie rights and, asked to write a screenplay. From what I have read and all that, Mario Puzo actually wrote the screenplay without knowing what screenplay was. Okay. Much later, after the film was released and all that, he had actually pursued screenwriting workshops and whatever lectures and tried to actually delve into what goes into screenwriting. But his very first script was not a study in craft of screenwriting. And we know today, history is proof that that screenplay is being used as an example to teach other students what screenwriting should be. So time and again, it only confirms my belief that storytelling is more intrinsic trait, a real talent than a skill. A talent that is there in you, you have to just unlock.
I'd give you full credit in unlocking that talent of mine. And I'm still not ready to go into any class. Still, I sit for your classes where you're teaching the craft of storytelling or screenplay writing. And my mind is still stubborn that I don't want to get into the craft because that will just mar my imagination and I'll get stuck in the rules. So am I going the right way or am I going the wrong way?
I'll cite an example about this. Why, if I am so against the craft, am I teaching the craft? Because I'll blame it on Gautam Buddha because there was an incident in Gautam Buddha's life where he and a disciple was crossing on a journey, and the disciple asked Gautam Buddha that everything he says is contradicting and paradoxical, and some days he says death is an eventuality, some days he says live your life to the fullest. What is it that one needs to do? There were cases when Gautam Buddha cited metaphors to convey that the one who bends survives like a grass, and the tree, the strong tree would be uprooted by the wind, by the storm. But at the same time, on other days during his discourse, he would reveal that it's better to live a lion's life for one day than being a goat for the rest of your life. So the disciple was completely confused and asked Gautam Buddha, what am I supposed to take from it? You say everything. And Gautam Buddha said, what happens when you are walking on a path and you're struck with a thorn? You take another thorn and you pluck the thorn off your skin. The disciple said, yes, fair enough, I would do that. And Gautam Buddha said, what would you do with the thorns? He said, I would throw it away. Which one? Both. Why? Because what would I do with the thorn? It has served its purpose, I would throw it away. That is what Gautam Buddha said to the disciple. That is how every concept is. Use them when it serves you, discard them when it doesn't. I think that is how we should take concepts, because we should understand this. Every concept was an interpretation by another human being. It is not written in stone. It can have its flaw. Now, if it is serving a purpose, use it by all means. If it is not, discard it.
Today, I can sum it up that I'm very, very happy, and I will come up with many more new questions.
I'm waiting for it.
When I go back and review my story again, start writing it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.